They laughed at him the first time. Not quietly either. Not the kind of polite, behind-the-curtains kind of laugh you get in neighborhoods like this. No, this was out in the open, windows down, voices carrying across trimmed lawns and matching mailboxes. All because an old man decided to fix his own fence. And if you'd driven past that morning, you probably would have thought the same thing they did. Just some stubborn retiree digging holes in the wrong place. Too proud to admit he didn't know what he was doing. But what nobody realized, not one single person on that street, was that he wasn't guessing, he was waiting. Now the neighborhood was called Maplewood Hollow, the kind of place where everything looked just a little too perfect, like it had been staged for a real estate brochure and never quite let go of that image. Fresh asphalt, identical trees planted at equal intervals, mailboxes all painted the same shade of black like they were following orders, and at the center of all that order sat the HOA, the Homeowners Association, which in theory was supposed to keep things nice, but in practice, well, it depended on who you asked. And if you asked most people quietly, off the record, they'd tell you it felt more like a group of folks who got a little too comfortable telling everyone else how to live. And then there was Leonard Grady, 64, retired machinist, lived in that same house longer than most of the board members had even been in the state. He drove an old blue pickup that rattled when it idled and had a dent in the rear panel that looked like it had a story, but he never told it. He kept his lawn trimmed, his porch clean, waved when you waved first, but he didn't go to meetings, didn't sign petitions, didn't argue, just sort of lived quietly on the edge of everyone else's noise, which, as it turns out, made him a perfect target. It started small, like it always does. A letter about the truck said it violated community aesthetics. Then another about the paint on his window shutters said it wasn't an approved color even though it had been that color for over a decade. Then a fine about a crack in his walkway, a crack that sat entirely on his property, mind you. Leonard paid a couple of them, ignored a few, filed one dispute that never got answered, and through it all, he never raised his voice, never showed up at a meeting to defend himself, and that silence, that steady, unbothered quiet. Well, people like the HOA board, they don't read that as patience, they read it as weakness. The head of the board was a woman named Denise Harper, early 50s, always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be, drove a white SUV that stayed cleaner than most kitchen counters. She had a way of talking to people that sounded polite on the surface, but carried just enough edge to remind you she thought she was right. Always right. And she had taken a particular interest in Leonard over the past couple of years, like he was a problem that needed solving, or maybe a lesson that needed teaching. So when Leonard started digging along the eastern edge of his yard that Saturday morning, it didn't take long for word to travel. Mrs. Keller, walking her golden retriever, slowed down, watched him for a bit, then made a phone call. By the time Leonard had set his third post, Denise was already pulling up. She didn't get out of the car, just rolled the window down halfway, rested her arm on the door, sunglasses still on, like she was observing something mildly disappointing rather than speaking to a person. "You know that fence isn't going where you think it is," she said, loud enough for anyone within half a block to hear. And sure enough, a couple of neighbors slowed their steps, pretending to adjust leashes or check their phones. "We had it measured last year. You're over the line." Leonard didn't look up right away, just kept packing gravel into the hole, tamping it down with slow, steady movements like he hadn't heard her, which only seemed to irritate her more. "When we confirm it," she continued, her voice tightening just a little, "you'll be responsible for removing every single post at your own expense." Now that got his attention, not because of the threat, but because of the certainty in her voice. Leonard straightened up slowly, one hand resting on the top of the post, and for a moment, he just looked at her. Not angry, not defensive, just thoughtful, like he was deciding whether the conversation was worth having. Then he nodded once, not agreeing, not apologizing, just acknowledging she'd spoken, and went right back to work. That right there is the kind of thing that drives people like Denise absolutely crazy. Being ignored without technically being disrespected, no argument to win, no reaction to feed off, just quiet. She lingered a second longer, like she was expecting something else, then scoffed under her breath and rolled the window up, tires crunching against the curb as she pulled away. But the look on her face, the one she wore just before she left, said this wasn't over. Not even close. And it wasn't. By Monday afternoon, letters had been sent, Official ones this time, stamped and dated, citing property line violations and pending action. By Tuesday, Denise had arranged for a contractor to come out later that week to document the encroachment, and by Wednesday morning, she was back again, this time with two other board members standing just behind her like a quiet little audience. Leonard was in the same spot, working his way down the line, post by post, like nothing had changed. Denise crossed her arms this time, didn't bother with the car. "We've already filed with the county," she said, voice firm, controlled, rehearsed. "You've got until Thursday to take these out yourself, or we'll handle it and bill you accordingly." One of the board members, a man named Carl, shifted his weight like he wasn't entirely comfortable being there, but he didn't say anything. Leonard set his shovel down, brushed his hands together, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he actually spoke more than a word or two. "If I were you," he said, calm as ever, almost conversational, "I'd hold off on that contractor." There was no attitude in it, no raised voice, just a statement, which somehow made it land heavier. Denise let out a short laugh, sharp and dismissive. "That's not really your decision to make." Leonard gave a small shrug, like maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't, then picked his shovel back up and went right back to digging. And standing there, watching him, Denise made the same mistake she'd been making for 2 years straight. She assumed he didn't know something. She assumed he was behind. She assumed he was about to lose. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Leonard had already made his move weeks ago, and by the time anyone else realized what was happening, it wouldn't be his fence they were worried about. It would be something a whole lot bigger. And here's the thing about people like Leonard: they don't rush, they don't react on impulse, and they sure don't show their hand early. Because when you've spent 40 years working machines that can take your fingers off if you get careless, you learn real quick that patience isn't just a virtue, it's survival. And Leonard carried that same mindset into everything. Even something as simple as a fence line that everybody else thought was just another petty neighborhood dispute. Now, if you had talked to anyone on that street that week, they would have told you the same version of the story, that Leonard had finally pushed too far, that the HOA was stepping in like they always did to protect property values, and that by Thursday, those fence posts were coming out one way or another. Denise made sure that version spread, too. Little conversations at the mailbox, quick comments during evening walks, just enough to frame the situation before anyone bothered to question it. Because once people think they understand something, they stop looking any deeper. But there were a couple folks who weren't so sure. Mrs. Keller, for one. She'd lived 2 houses down from Leonard for almost 15 years, long enough to know he wasn't careless. She'd seen him measure twice just to hang a bird feeder. So watching him dig that line without hesitation, without checking and rechecking like most people would, it didn't sit right with her. And she mentioned that to her husband over dinner that Tuesday night. Said, "Something about this feels off." Leonard doesn't guess. Her husband just shrugged, said maybe the old guy was getting stubborn with age, which, to be fair, happens, but even he didn't sound convinced. And then there was Carl, the same Carl who'd been standing behind Denise that morning, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He wasn't a bad guy, not really, just someone who'd said yes to joining the board because it sounded like the responsible thing to do, and over time, he'd gotten used to going along with decisions without asking too many questions. Easier that way. Less conflict. But standing there watching Leonard work, hearing the way he said, "I'd hold off on that contractor," like it wasn't a suggestion but more of a quiet warning, it stuck with him. That night, Carl pulled up the old HOA records. Nothing official, just meeting notes, past approvals, construction logs, and he found the entry from 2019. Retaining wall installation along eastern boundary. Approved unanimously, no mention of neighboring consent attached, no survey confirmation included, just a contractor invoice and a completion note. At the time, nobody thought twice about it. The wall looked good, kept the slope from eroding, added a nice clean line to the neighborhood. But now, reading it again, Carl felt that little flicker of doubt, the kind that starts small but doesn't go away. Meanwhile, Leonard, he wasn't looking at old HOA files. He was sitting at his kitchen table Tuesday evening with a folder that had been worn soft at the edges. Inside it were documents older than half the houses on that street. His father's handwriting on some of them, signatures on others, and right there, clipped neatly in the middle, was a copy of a land agreement dated back to 1984. See, Before Maplewood Hollow was ever Maplewood Hollow, before the roads were paved and the trees were planted in perfect lines, that land had belonged to a handful of families, Leonard's included, and when the original developer came in, buying up parcels to build the neighborhood, Leonard's father had agreed to something that, at the time, seemed like a fair trade. He granted access, a strip of land along what would become the Southern Road, enough to connect the future neighborhood to the main county route, but he didn't just hand it over clean. He set a condition, one that most people, over time, forgot even existed. The easement, as it was written, remained valid only as long as the eastern property boundary of their retained land was never formally disputed or encroached upon. A small clause, easy to overlook until it wasn't. Leonard had grown up hearing about that clause, not as some grand legal weapon, but as a simple reminder from his father. Know what's yours, and know when it matters. For decades, it hadn't mattered, nobody pushed, nobody crossed the line. Until that retaining wall went up in 2019, 2 feet over, according to the survey Leonard had quietly commissioned 3 weeks ago. And that's the part nobody saw coming. Because while Denise and the board were busy drafting violation letters and lining up contractors, Leonard had already filed a formal boundary dispute with the county surveyor's office, paperwork submitted, evidence attached, everything done clean and by the book, no noise, no announcement, just action. By Wednesday morning, the gears were already turning, not fast, not dramatic, just steady official. Denise, of course, didn't know any of this when she made her next move. She showed up that morning earlier than before, like she wanted to catch Leonard off guard, clipboard in hand this time, sunglasses perched on her head instead of her face, ready for business. Behind her, Carl again, along with another board member named Trish, who looked far more interested in the spectacle than the outcome. The contractor was scheduled for the next day, Thursday, and Denise made sure to mention that more than once. "You've still got time to fix this," she said, standing just inside the curb line, careful not to step onto Leonard's property, but close enough to make it feel like she might. "Once the report is filed, it's out of our hands." Leonard was setting another post, same rhythm as before, dig, level, gravel, tamp, like a metronome that didn't care who was watching. "You ever notice," he said suddenly, not looking at her, voice low but clear, "how people get real confident when they think they've got all the information?" Denise frowned slightly, thrown off script for just a second. "I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean." Leonard pressed the post into place, checked it with a level, adjusted it a fraction of an inch, then finally looked up. "It means," he said, "you might want to double-check yours." Now that landed. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise, like he'd just placed something exactly where it needed to be. Trish let out a quiet scoff, like she thought he was bluffing. Denise didn't laugh this time, though. She just held his gaze a second longer than before, then shook her head slightly, dismissing it. "We'll see tomorrow," she said. Leonard gave a small nod. "Yeah," he replied, almost to himself, "you will." And for the first time since this whole thing started, there was a shift. Not visible, not something you could point to and say, "There it is," but you could feel it, like the air right before a storm, when everything goes just a little too still. That afternoon, Mrs. Keller noticed something else, a county vehicle driving slowly down the main road, not stopping, just passing through. She watched it from her front window, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, and felt that same unease settle in her chest, because county vehicles didn't just wander into neighborhoods like this without a reason. Carl saw it too, from his driveway. And this time, he didn't brush it off. He went back inside, pulled up the county property records online, cross-referenced parcel numbers, zoning notes, easement documentation, and when he found the original filing from 1984, scanned and archived, but still perfectly legible, his stomach dropped just a little. Because there it was, clear as day, the clause. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, replaying Leonard's words in his head. "I'd hold off on that contractor." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a heads-up. And by the time Carl realized that, it was already too late to change course without admitting they'd been wrong. Thursday morning was supposed to be simple. Contractor shows up, documents the violation, process moves forward, clean, controlled, predictable. But life doesn't always follow the version of events people write in their heads, especially when someone else has been quietly rewriting the rules behind the scenes. Because what rolled into Maplewood Hollow that morning wasn't a contractor's truck. It was two county vehicles, followed by a third, all of them pulling up along the southern road, the one everybody used without thinking twice, the one nobody even realized they didn't technically own. Leonard was already outside when they arrived, not working this time, just standing near the last post, hands resting lightly on top of it, watching. Denise stepped out of her SUV the moment she saw the county seal on the doors, confusion written all over her face, clipboard still tucked under her arm like it suddenly didn't belong there anymore. Carl came up behind her, slower this time, quieter. One of the county officials approached, paperwork in hand, asked for the HOA representative, and when Denise stepped forward, still trying to piece together what was happening, he handed her the notice. She read the first line, then the second, then went back to the top and read it again. And just like that, the entire situation flipped. Not the fence, not the posts, something bigger, something nobody had even considered. Denise didn't say anything at first, and if you knew her, really knew her, that was the first sign something was wrong, because she always had something to say, always had a response ready, a way to steer the conversation back into her control. But standing there on the edge of that road, paper in hand, lips pressed tight, she looked like someone who had just realized the rules she'd been playing by weren't the only ones in the game. The county official cleared his throat, not impatient, just procedural, like he'd done this 100 times before and knew better than to rush the moment. "Ma'am," he said, calm and even, "this is a formal notice of easement review and temporary access restriction. You'll have 60 days to resolve the dispute and negotiate continued use of the roadway. Otherwise, access rights may be suspended." Suspended. That word hung there for a second, didn't sound like much at first, just another piece of bureaucratic language, until it settled in what it actually meant. No road, no direct way in or out of Maplewood Hollow. Now, technically, there was another way, a narrow county-maintained route that looped around the backside of the development, but it added close to 2 miles, and more importantly, it wasn't designed for the kind of daily traffic a whole neighborhood would suddenly dump onto it. School runs, deliveries, emergency vehicles, everything would slow down, bottleneck, become inconvenient at best, dangerous at worst. Denise looked up from the paper, eyes scanning the street, like maybe the answer was written somewhere on one of the identical mailboxes. This has to be a mistake," she said, but there wasn't much conviction behind it. The official shook his head slightly. "Dispute was filed 3 weeks ago. Survey confirmed encroachment along the eastern boundary, under the terms of the original easement agreement. That triggers a review." And there it was, clean, simple, undeniable. Carl let out a slow breath beside her, one hand rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to ease a tension that had already settled too deep. He didn't need to read the paper to know. He'd already seen enough the night before. Trish, standing a few steps back, whispered something under her breath that sounded a lot like, "You've got to be kidding me," but no one answered her. And through all of it, Leonard didn't move. He just stood there by that last post, watching, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just a kind of quiet certainty, like this moment had been set in motion a long time ago and was only now catching up to everyone else. Denise turned then, slowly, and for the first time since she'd ever spoken to him, there was no edge in her voice, no performance, just something closer to disbelief. "You did this?" she asked. Leonard tilted his head slightly, considering the question like it deserved a careful answer, then gave a small shrug. "I followed the agreement," he said. That was it. No speech, no explanation, just the truth, stripped down to its bones. Denise took a step toward him, the gravel crunching under her shoes louder than it should have been. "You're going to shut down access to an entire neighborhood over a fence." Now that carried something, not authority this time, but frustration, maybe even a little panic. Leonard shook his head once, slow and steady. "No," he said, "the agreement does that. I just pointed out where it was broken. And if you were standing there, really paying attention, you'd notice something in that moment. Not just what he said, but how he said it. No heat, no bitterness, which somehow made it hit harder, because it wasn't about getting even, it was about being right and knowing it." The county workers moved past them then, starting to place temporary notices along the road, bright signs, impossible to miss. "Access under review. easement pending, words that turned a normal, everyday street into something uncertain, something fragile. Neighbors began to gather. First a couple, then a few more, drawn by the vehicles, the tension, the shift in the air. Questions started bubbling up, overlapping. What's going on? Is the road closing? What do you mean 60 days? And as answers filtered through, incomplete and uneven, you could see the mood change, confusion turning into concern, concern edging toward frustration. And like it always does in situations like this, that frustration needed somewhere to land. Some of it landed on Denise, quiet looks, raised eyebrows, the unspoken, how did this happen? Some of it landed on Leonard, because he was the easiest visible target, the one person standing apart from the rest, not explaining, not apologizing. Mrs. Keller pushed her way gently through the small crowd, stopping a few feet from Leonard. You knew about this? She asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. Leonard looked at her, softened just a fraction. I knew the agreement, he said. She nodded slowly, processing that, then glanced toward the road, the signs, the cluster of neighbors now talking louder than before. And you're okay with all this? That question lingered a little longer. Leonard followed her gaze, took in the street he'd lived on for decades, the people who'd waved at him, ignored him, fined him, all of it, and for a moment, you could almost see the weight of it settling behind his eyes. I'm okay with things being what they are, he said finally. Not what she expected, not what anyone expected, but honest. Denise, meanwhile, had stepped aside, phone pressed to her ear, voice low but urgent, already shifting into problem-solving mode, calling lawyers, maybe the county office, trying to find a way to undo something that had already been set in motion, because that's what people like her do. They don't sit with consequences, they look for angles. Carl stayed where he was, though, watching Leonard, and after a moment, he walked over, slower than before, more deliberate. You could have said something, Carl said quietly. Leonard met his eyes. Would it have changed anything? Carl didn't answer right away, because deep down, he knew it probably wouldn't have. The board had already decided what they believed, already moved forward like they were in control. He let out a small, humorless breath. No, he admitted. And that was the closest thing to an apology Leonard was ever going to get. The rest of the day unfolded in that strange, uneven way things do when a situation outgrows the story people had been telling about it. Calls were made, meetings were scheduled, emails sent out with carefully worded explanations. Temporary inconvenience, ongoing review, community cooperation, all the phrases that try to smooth over something that isn't smooth anymore. But the reality was simple. For the next 60 days, Maplewood Hollow wasn't as secure, as predictable, as controlled as it thought it was, and all because one quiet man had decided to stop absorbing pressure and start applying it. By late afternoon, the county vehicles were gone. The signs remained, the road still open, for now, but different, like everyone saw it a little more clearly than before. Leonard finished setting that last post just before sunset, checked the line one more time, wiped his hands on an old rag, and stepped back, not admiring it, not celebrating, just done. Denise drove past him once more on her way out, slower this time. No window rolled down, no comment thrown his way, just a brief glance, unreadable, and then she was gone. And that could have been the end of it. Neat, satisfying, a clear line drawn between right and wrong. But real life doesn't wrap itself up that cleanly. Because here's the part people still argue about, the part that splits opinion every time the story gets told. Was Leonard justified? On paper? Absolutely. The agreement was clear, the violation was real, and he followed the process exactly as it was meant to be followed. But in practice, in a neighborhood where dozens of families suddenly had to deal with the fallout, longer commutes, delayed services, a sense of instability they hadn't asked for, some people saw it differently. They didn't see a man standing up for his rights. They saw someone who could have handled it quieter, simpler, without dragging everyone else into it. And maybe that's the real question underneath all of this, not just what's legal, but what's fair, and whether those two things always line up the way we want them to. Because Leonard never raised his voice, never made a scene, never demanded attention. He just waited, understood the system better than the people trying to control him, and when the moment came, he acted. So what do you think? Was he protecting what was his, or did he go too far? Should he have warned them? Or was silence the only language they ever listened to? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on this one. And if you've ever seen something like this play out in your own neighborhood, hit share, because stories like this, they happen more often than people think.